Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm Annie, and today with us we have Dr. Meaghan McKacy, who is a professor at the Utah Valley University. Morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Alright, so let's just get started. So I'm Annie. I'm a rising junior in high school in Illinois, and I started this project because I noticed a lot of misinformation, especially during COVID and on social media and stuff. So could you please introduce yourself and what do you do?
Yeah, of course. First, I'm so impressed that you are a rising junior and you've taken on a project like this. I think it's absolutely wonderful. So kudos to you. My name is Dr. Meaghan McKacy. I'm an assistant professor in public relations and strategic communication at Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah. Um, that's my brief overview. I can give you a little bit more background if you'd like.
Yeah, why did you choose this career initially?
I love that question because it was not a linear path at all, and I think you hear that with a lot of folks. I graduated my undergrad. I During the last big recession, so in 2009, there were not many job opportunities, and so I thought I'll just get a master's degree. So I did my master's in environmental humanities at the University of Utah. After that, I went into alternative energy. I spent about 4 years working in renewable energy in community outreach, first in the nonprofit sector, and then for our local electricity utility, Rocky Mountain Power.
Mhm.
And in that time, especially when I was working for the utility and having conversations with a lot of customers about their perceptions related to renewable energy, I really started to pick up on how all these people could receive the same information from their utility provider and form vastly different attitudes related to that information. And I started to think about, how there were all these factors. You can think about things like ideology and religiosity, which is a very big one here in Utah. Um, Age, gender, there are so many factors that can come into how we form our attitudes. And I thought I could maybe study this. So I went back to school at the University of Utah and I did my PhD in communication. And my passion areas are really in science and environmental communication. And then my position here at Utah Valley University centers more on public relations and strategic communication. So I love when I can meld those worlds and talk about these kind of topical areas of environment and science, but from a strategic lens. So how is it we can use different modes of communication and consider those factors of influence to have these strategic conversations?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's so cool.
Ooh.
Yeah, so why do you think truth is so important and why do you think misinformation is such a big issue right now?
Oh, truth. I mean, it's a bit of a loaded question with why is truth so important. I mean, it's the foundation of our society.
Mhm.
To be able to speak to truth. I think that we live in a really complicated time. And talking to your generation where you've grown up in this completely digitized world, as an individual, I can access any information I want, right? I can go online and I can find the answers to any questions. I have a wealth of information at my fingertips. That also means that I am overwhelmed by information just constantly, right?
Mhm.
um, I'll often ask my students in class, how many forms of media have you seen today? And maybe classes at like noon or something, and they'll be like, oh, I was on TikTok, or, and then I'm like, okay, well, what about, billboards, advertisements, flyers in the hallway, and we start kind of broadening what we mean by that information, and it's just that apparent that we are inundated and we can't actually process and make a million decisions every day. So our brains are kind of constantly filtering through that information and trying to decide where to delegate kind of our cognitive resources, right? Like we only have so much capacity. And so because of that, we focus on some questions and disregard others. And that leads to a world that's ripe for misinformation because we're not always 100% on and critically evaluating the information in front of us. And so we often rely on kind of shortcuts, right? Like we only have so much capacity. So it's like, we call them like heuristics, these kind of if-then statements. If I see something related to my prior belief in vaccination, then I'm going to believe it, or something like that. It's kind of a quick, it doesn't require much mental energy, and I can just quickly make a decision. And we're much more likely to rely on those cognitive shortcuts when they appeal to like our emotions and stuff. So when you think about how misinformation is often wrapped up in kind of clickbait, right? A lot of those titles are very sensational, and it primes us almost to just be like, oh yeah, okay, I believe that, without kind of taking a moment and critically thinking about it. So we have this kind of perfect storm of, we have all this information at our fingertips, but we don't have the ability to really sit and think with every decision that we're making.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. What do you what do you think the worst like type of misinformation is? Like about what?
Oh, that's a good hard questions. I think we've seen a lot, over the last couple of years with COVID. COVID's such an interesting example because it is several crises in once. It's a health crisis, it's an economic crisis, it's a misinformation crisis. And we also see that with misinformation, there are more vulnerable populations. So individuals who are English as a second language. The vast majority of misinformation tracking, individuals who are trying to catch misinformation online, the vast majority of that is done in English. And so you have people who English is not their first language. They're maybe using WhatsApp or Facebook in another language. They're not receiving the same amount of attention that English sites are. And so they're more vulnerable to misinformation. Elderly populations are more vulnerable. Individuals suffering from depression are much more vulnerable to misinformation. So I think that it's dangerous when we recognize that, there are these populations that are just that much more susceptible. And COVID's a great example, especially when it comes down to life and death scenarios.
Yeah, for sure. So what do you think would be like the best way to like eliminate slash like avoid slash reduce misinformation? Because I saw you had like an article about like emotion and humor as misinformation antidotes. So like do you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I can totally talk about that. That was a fun article to write. I really like to study emotion and also humor. I think that they are, especially humor is understudied in scientific context because there's this perception that, scientists need to be very formal and straight-laced. And, so the idea of like making jokes about research is really kind of a new thing. Just like I had said earlier, that misinformation is often kind of wrapped up in emotion, and we get those clickbaity titles, I think that emotion can be a tool to help combat misinformation. It is a way to draw attention to the topic. The best way to address misinformation is to encourage critical thinking and encourage individuals to really evaluate that information. Looking at things like source credibility is incredibly important. Like, where did this information come from? Who wrote it? Am I seeing this same information on other sources as well? Like, kind of fact checking. We found in our research that not only is humor becoming more prevalent with science communication, especially on social media. We've done some research looking at Twitter and Instagram, and found, things like satire and parody are really pretty frequently used. But also, we did some experimental testing that looked at, if a scientist was to say post a tweet that used satire compared to one that didn't, what does that do for audiences' perceptions of the scientists? And we actually found that the use of humor, specifically satire and then wordplay, so kind of like manipulating words, increase perceptions of likability and intentions to engage with the scientists. So people who saw that tweet were like, wow, I'm kind of a little more interested in this scientist. Maybe I want to follow them, or I'm going to like their post. And so that shows us that maybe this perception that a scientist needs to be very reserved and kind of button up, maybe there's a little more wiggle room. Maybe they can kind of engage with audiences in those ways. And so by increasing, likability or engagement, then that's going to influence perceptions of trust and credibility. So those are some potential avenues, and it's really early stages of research. So it's kind of an exciting area to be looking into.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much all my questions about misinformation. So just for fun, do you have like a role model?
Oh, goodness. Broadly speaking, academically speaking?
Either way.
Oh man. Well, I mean, academically, my advisor, Sarah Yo at the University of Utah, taught me everything I know. So I have to give a shout out to her. She's an incredible researcher. And she's been really, really great to work with over the years. So she's pretty wonderful to work with.
Yeah. So, I think that would be also just to like close this out. Do you have any like advice for people, especially like teens? It can be about like information or not or anything.
Yeah. I think that, one of the things I encourage with my students, I teach a media literacy class at Utah Valley University, and we just talk a lot about the importance of paying attention to the news and where you're getting your information from. So I start every class and I'm just like, okay, what have we learned today? And then like, where have we learned that from? And slowly over the course of the semester, students kind of start, they obviously anticipate this. They're like, okay, this is how class is going to start every day. And so they start kind of paying more attention to the news, and they start looking at other sources as well. So, early in the semester, it's a lot of just kind of TikTok. And then it's like kind of broadening out and looking at local newspapers, digitally, of course. But I encourage people to do that on fact checking, to be aware of what's going on in the world, okay, if I saw this on TikTok, can I find someone else who's talking about it, maybe on CNN or the BBC, like trying to find other kind of confirming sources. And I think that is actually a really empowering action for teens and young adults to recognize that, like, when we think about media, it can feel like this big monolith, like, it's this top-down information, but the one of the benefits of the digital society that we live in is that we really get to engage, and we get to look for all this information, and so empowering them to really be critical thinkers, also to recognize that like the downside of that is because we have so much agency in where we get our information from, we have the opportunity to only pay attention to information we want to be true, right? Like, I don't know if anyone has talked about, we can live in these digital silos. I don't have to encounter information that conflicts with my worldviews if I don't want to. Like, I can just go to news websites that align with my own ideologies. And I don't have to challenge myself. I have to consciously make the decisions to be like, okay, well, I've looked at this site that maybe aligns more politically with what I consider. Maybe now I'm going to go spend some time on another site and see how the conversation is different. And that can be hard. That can be really hard because we're resistant to information that doesn't align with what we already believe. We have these cognitive biases where we just want to be affirmed with our knowledge. So examining multiple sources, recognizing that they have agency in their decision-making process. I think it's also exciting too. I've noticed an uptick in actually this kind of digital literacy education that's going on. In the state of Utah, we now have digital literacy programs in our elementary schools, which is great, but I have looked at the content, and it's very much tool and technology focused. And I would love to see more of kind of what we've talked about with this kind of like encouraging critical thinking, right? Like, it's not just about, do you know how to use a search engine? It's like, well, what does it mean when the top listings are different for me than for you? It's kind of taking in my previous search history and filtering that information based off of what it thinks I would like, maybe not what the most appropriate answer is. So I think we're making steps, to give students more of those tools and abilities, but really just that empowerment to recognize they have the ability to go out there and get that information.
Yeah.
I would turn that question back on you, because you've done quite a few of these interviews. So what do you think is helpful for teens and young adults? I'm curious.
Probably I like really agree with what you said, just like to like consider both sides and like consider how like emotions or like can like affect like stuff, but also um yeah, probably just checking like on different sites about the same issue, because um I also like noticed like some uh like if you just like look at like one side of something like for a long time, that's like all you see. So you have to like actively like search for the other side. So I think that's very important too. So yeah.
Great. Yeah. And I mean, projects like what you're doing right now, where teens get to see, like, hey, this is, a young woman who's around my same age, who's, really taking steps and engaging with the media to ask some big questions. So I applaud you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, so that will be it, I think. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.